All right, everyone, and we're live on the Modern Web Podcast. And today we're going to talk about React Native. And so, who we have here today? We have a series of people who are popular in the React Native community, and they definitely know their stuff. So, let me introduce them. This is Eric Vicente. Oh, what did I say?
Oh.
Ooh, sorry. One second. Technical difficulties. Hearing an echo. There we go. So we have Eric Vicente. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Eric Vicente, and I come from a web development background. And I adopted React in 2014 at the startup I was working for at the time. I joined Facebook also in 2014 and was actually part of the React Native team when we open sourced it in 2015. And I spent a lot of my time working not only on React Native, but on various React Native apps at Facebook. And I've really sort of sunk my teeth into the navigation problem because I've noticed it's one of the big pain points for people in the React Native community. So I've worked on a handful of navigation solutions, both as part of React Native Core, but recently as part of a project called React Navigation, which kind of aims to provide the most extensible and also easiest to use JavaScript-only navigation library for React Native. And we can talk a little bit more about what that means a little later on. But I left Facebook in January, and these days I've been working purely on open source, so on React Navigation and also on an exciting new project to me, which is kind of like an open source Firebase that lets you write applications equally well on the web as on mobile. So that's another very exciting project for me that I'd be happy to talk about later. But that's me.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. So next we have Brent. Brent, how do you say your last name? Vatney?
Yeah, Vatney works.
Well, you say it works. What's the preferred pronunciation?
I mean, it's ultimately like the North American interpretation of a Norwegian name. So,
okay. Okay.
And I don't actually speak Norwegian, and so I'm not even sure at this point what way I should be saying it. So I guess Vatney works.
Okay. Hey, Brent, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I work at a company called Expo. We're kind of like Rails for React Native. It's kind of the easiest way to explain it in a sentence. I used to work on consulting for most of my career, just helping out various companies. And briefly before joining Expo, I was doing consulting with React Native and was contributing a lot to the React Native project, and I guess continue to do that to this day. I also work on React Navigation with Eric.
And what, for those listening, what's React Navigation?
So React Navigation is kind of like React Router for React Native. There are just a few different problems that need to be solved in Native. In particular, the patterns are a little bit different for how you go from screen A to screen B. Often, rather than just like on the web, you would click a link and then the entire screen would just switch and you would see the other route right away. Rather than doing that, you might do something like push a screen on top and then have the behavior of being able to swipe back, and you'll have like a custom header with, like a back button and a title and some other buttons potentially in it. You might have a tab bar with various things. And so React Navigation basically is providing that UI and sort of the infrastructure so you can build applications with these various navigation patterns. React Native.
Right on. Next, we have Mike Grabowski. Is that how you say it, Mike?
Yeah, I think that works too. I mean, I can try. I can. I mean, the correct way,
teach us.
or the Polish way to say it would be Grabowski.
Grabowski?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, what makes it tricky is probably that ski, the end, which is the very Eastern European sort of language thingy. But it's all right. I mean, even my mother calls me Mike, so. To be honest, I'm okay with my last name being English anyway. Yeah, so my story started with React Native, I guess like 3 years ago when I was about to write a mobile app for iOS and for Android. And since I didn't know anything about Java, I thought like React Native is going to be my way to go, because obviously I can make the app to run on both platforms, which is going to obviously please my boss. So that's how I brought React Native to my daily routine. And the biggest problem that I had from the very beginning 2 years ago, for the people that joined React Native recently, this may be no longer the case. But 2 years ago, working with native modules and third-party modules was kind of hard. I mean, in order to include third-party libraries, you had to do a lot of manual steps that were sort of different for people coming from web background, because on web, you just npm install things, and that sort of works. But on native, you have some native code that you have to link. So that was the problem that I was having from the very beginning. And together with Alexei Kurev, we decided that we will create a tool that will basically do those steps for you. So we decided to automate that process. We called it RMPM, and later on, it was renamed to React Native Link. And we sort of merged it to React Native Core because we believe that this has to be part of the framework itself. And so from that point on, I was sort of moving myself around toolings and various infrastructure things around React Native, recently doing releases, changelogs, and generally trying to orchestrate that open source part of React Native, which is living on GitHub and trying to make sure that we are syncing things with Facebook. Apart from that, I co-founded the company called ColdStack, which is doing React Native and cross-platform consultancy. So that love to React Native sort of expanded to cross-platform love that we all have, and on a regular basis, we're trying to solve problems that people might be having when it comes to launching your app on many platforms. So if you ever wondered how to do it properly, or generally like how it's possible to run web app on a TV and things like that, this is sort of what we are doing on a regular basis. So I'll be happy to talk a little bit about that as well, and generally, everything related to releases and all that stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thanks, Mike, for joining us. And last but not least, Mr. Ken Wheeler in the American flag outfit. Hi, Ken. You are muted right now, Ken.
I was waiting for my moment to unmute.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ken, for those who have not yet experienced the Ken Wheeler.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I'm Ken Wheeler, conveniently located right here in America. Shocker. And I'm the director of open source. What a title. At a company called Formidable, which is a JavaScript consultancy based in Seattle. But they keep me here in New Jersey for obvious reasons. And yeah, we build apps, mostly JavaScript. You do JavaScript, React, Node, and now React Native for big companies. I had gotten into React pretty early, had a lot of fun with it, and then React Native came out. And to the best of my knowledge, I hold the title for the creator of the first fart app made with React Native, which I'm pretty proud of. I don't know, maybe somebody internally had done it prior, but I think within 15 minutes of the public release, I had it out, so I felt good. Been hooked since then. We've done React Native apps for large clients. We're also in the open source community doing a lot of React and React Native open source. I'm probably best known for building things that people probably dismiss as a bad idea. I also like red meat and recreational archery.
Wonderful. So to get started, just in case there's any listeners who are not super familiar with React Native, I did want to start just to kind of talk about what React Native is. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Jay Phelps. I used to work at Netflix, but very recently I joined ThisDot, who is the company who's putting on this live stream. And that's my spiel. I have a lot of React experience. I'm actually fairly new to React Native overall in the grand scheme of things, but I've been doing a lot more of it here lately, which is why I was very interested in bringing all these people together to discuss. So let's talk about what React Native actually is and what it isn't. Like I'm just going to call out some people and we're just going to chat organically or whatever. But like Eric, I'm gonna pick on you to begin with, just because you're dressed so fancy.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Like, why, if a newcomer is coming in, they're thinking about using React Native, why would they use that over something like Cordova?
Sure. Cordova is great because it allows you to use web technologies use your web development skill set to build mobile apps. And React Native has that same advantage because a lot of people are familiar with writing JavaScript apps and React apps on the web, and you can reuse a bunch of that knowledge when building apps with React Native. But unlike Cordova and PhoneGap before it, React Native allows you to literally control the native views on the screen in iOS or Android, and even talk to custom native views that your application developers might be writing, or other custom native features that are only on that particular device that you might want to write native code for. So React Native really helps allow you to mix and match components in your application that are might be native, might be owned by JavaScript, but regardless, you can still bring your web development skill set and build high quality mobile apps. So that's kind of how I would describe that.
Is there performance benefits for doing it that way, or is it just so that you can utilize the existing views? Like, what are the specific pros to, like, why is it better to do that than just reinventing like the same style of view but in CSS or something like that, in HTML in the PhoneGap?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a pretty huge performance benefit, because when you're using PhoneGap, you are literally using basically a whole web browser inside of your app, which has a lot of sort of heaviness. It needs to support a lot of things for backwards compatibility that we can make a little bit more optimized if we control it directly ourselves. And the other thing that you had mentioned was that we can mix and match with native views. So if you have an application that's it's already an existing native application, you'll be able to incrementally adopt React Native by installing one screen at a time, or if you have existing native components that you want to use inside of your React Native application, you can do that as well. So the sort of ability to mix and match components that are native components or pre-built components is one of the huge strengths of React Native over something like Ionic and Cordova, or even something like Flutter.
Mm. And for those who aren't familiar with Flutter and the whole Dart thing, what's the scoop on that?
Sure. I'm not sure. I mean, I think Grabow has played with it a little bit more than I have, but Flutter is a technology coming out of Google that's similar to React Native in a lot of ways and has a lot of the same benefits, but it's also very technically ambitious in that it attempts to control the full screen's worth of components rather than allowing you to sort of mix and match native views. But I'm happy to let it see, maybe Brent has some other comments.
Yeah, Brent or Mike, obviously feel free, anyone jump in.
Yeah, I feel like Eric, what you said is kind of a good description. I mean, I've heard that someone compared Flutter to more like a game engine, which I think is a very accurate description. And I actually think that the approach that they took is different, but yet it's sort of interesting because given that there are some issues that we are sort of facing with React Native, the problems that has been around for a long time, the fact that Flutter approach might not have them just because of the fact they took that route is kind of exciting. I've played around with it last year for a couple of weeks, and we are going to do it once again this time, since we are trying to get some Flutter apps out there. I was sort of very impressed by the documentation that they got, and the fact that Dart sort of types bring a whole different level of experience to your writing. So the only thing that I really hated about it that time was the fact that there was no JSX, and I highly recommend everyone who hates JSX to just try out Flutter, and you will know what I mean. That's no longer true because the recent release of Flutter has some syntactic sugar addition to the Dart itself, which makes it very easy and pleasant to use. But last year, the experience wasn't that nice. So for someone coming out from React Native background, used to a very clean render content and sort of glancing through the tree, that was something that I faced. Like that was the biggest difference that I saw for the first time. Just following up on what you said very quickly regarding React Native itself and the performance benefits. I was doing iOS mobile apps before I started React Native. And for me, the benefits are also for native developers, because the abstraction that React Native sort of adds on top, it sort of restricts you to write the app in a certain way thanks to React and sort of declarative approach. And so when I was doing iOS apps myself, I remember doing a lot of very, very bad performance solutions to the problems pretty much in an imperative way. And so when I was, for instance, asked to write a Tinder-like app, I was like, there is no way I'm gonna do it. Like, I have no idea how to do animations and stuff. And with React Native and React Native Gesture Handler and all those libraries, I feel like, you know, I'm sort of now like the senior mobile architect. Like, I can pretty much architect anything that I want just because React Native gives me all those necessary building blocks that are very easy to understand and to operate with.
That's great. So, so would you say, Mike, since you come from a native background, if I am at a startup or something like that, and I'm trying to decide, should I use React Native or should I actually write a fully native app using Swift or Java or whatever platform I want to target, or both? Do you have advice when it comes to that type of thing? Like, when is the good point to write with the native platform versus using React Native? You know, what would you say?
Well, that is the question that I'm sort of answering quite often at ColdStack, because many times we are dealing with, you know, clients coming from different backgrounds. Yeah. Every time I'm trying to carefully study the use case for the app, and to be honest, if the app is all about, you know, displaying data and stuff like this, I'm always going to suggest React Native or any other cross-platform solution that is going to be popular at that point. Mainly because, you know, there is no point in, like, React Native plays, like, sort of works very well for those sort of use cases, right? Especially for displaying data and doing sort of complex interactions like that. I feel like this is the place where it works very well for me. So I'd say that, you know, unless you are not planning to write a game, however, we've seen React Native games pretty much recently as well, then the answer is pretty simple, right? And especially if you're a startup just starting out, I feel like this will be just easier for you to establish rather than having two separate teams, just having one, which I think is a big benefit. And there is a pretty nice talk by James Ida from one of the React comps, which is called Cross Stack. I don't know what was the name, but he did mention cross stack engineering, and so I would suggest, you know, just listening to this talk if you have doubts about selecting frameworks and just debating whether to go React Native or native route, because it has a pretty much good amount of, you know, differences between them and how to, you know, decide on that from a business perspective as well.
All right. Anyone else have any thoughts?
I think that a big factor is also the composition of a team at the organization. So if you already have a team that's familiar with iOS and Android native technologies, and they're not familiar with web technologies, it's going to be a lot, I would say, less valuable for the team in most cases. Whereas if your team composition is largely web developers, then you're going to get a lot more benefit rather than hiring, you know, several specialists in iOS and Android to go ahead and build your app. You can continue to build your web development team and kind of sort of layer the knowledge on top of how to use these same technologies in a different context. And I think that's usually where you get the most value from it.
If a person was going to build, let's say I'm a startup and I want to build a Tinder clone, because we were talking about Tinder, but it's a good example because I hear a lot of people wanting to build similar apps, similar functionality at least. If I was wanting to do that, let's say I'm the founder of that Tinder clone and I haven't hired anyone, should I hire only JavaScript people or should I also hire some native people as well to support them, even if I used React Native? Like, do you think it's something that, obviously in a perfect world, I would hire everyone, right? But I'm saying from a total startup perspective, do you find it necessary to have at least one native person, or do you think an entire team of JavaScript people would be able to handle it?
I think it really depends on the team. Like if people are willing to, like it's not like this stuff is all unlearnable. You can dig in and learn how to use Xcode and Android Studio and how all the details of these things work to the extent that you need to when using React Native. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's a tough question to answer because it really depends on the individuals involved. Yeah, I don't know. I can punt that to someone else.
I can hop in there. So at Formidable, we do have a senior mobile engineer that you know, I work with pretty closely. I mean, I've done mobile development, but I'm also a knucklehead. So you know, I'm not like, you know, I'm not a senior mobile engineer. You know, I'm probably like a junior mobile engineer, but like senior on the JavaScript side, but it's surprisingly helpful. But maybe not surprisingly, but you know, it's wildly helpful to have someone who is like really good at mobile, native mobile development. Because you know, sometimes, you know, a lot of the time I'm monkeying around in Swift or Android, and you know, I can make it work and I understand how Xcode works. But when you have somebody who understands it deeply, you know, you just bounce something off them and they're like, oh yeah, well here's this you know, mobile paradigm you've never even heard of. Just do it like this, and you're like, well, all right. So I think that's helpful. I mean, when you're just building it out, you know, it's whatever. But you know, when it's in prod and when it's a client and when things go wrong, that mobile engineer is really helpful to have there. As far as a Tinder app, I would absolutely do it in React Native. I built my own. It's called Kender.
Did you really?
Nice.
I did, and it's on Expo. Holla Brent, and it's really just me. So if you can just match with me, you can't dismiss it. So you only have to swipe. You swipe right or left, you like me. So that's how that goes. Sorry.
Wait, can I really download this right now? How do I do this?
I gotta find the link. I'll send it to you.
Okay, yeah, send it to me. Actually, find it right now because I want to post it in the chat so everyone else can find this as well. So Ken is going to be AFK for a bit while he finds the Tinder link. Cool. That's all great to know. So so now is the time where we can basically, now that we have a general idea of what React Native is, I mean, obviously we're not going to explain everything, but kind of wanted to just open the floor for just whatever discussion, you know, like what is the Expo folks doing these days? Are you guys just working on the stability platform? Or are you guys working on something next, like some new thing, Brent?
Yeah, we have a couple things that we're working on that are kind of longer term. Nothing that we really want to talk about too much, just because it could go nowhere, and we don't really want people to. Yeah,
so super secret stuff.
I wouldn't even say it's super secret. It's just at this point, it's not. Like we've done stuff like this before, and it just hasn't panned out, and we've thrown it away. And so it'd be, you know, it's no point in really talking about it. I guess we're working on some things related to making it easier to build games. Is one thing like it's easy to say, yeah, that's still pretty early. Some of the stuff we're doing there. Yeah, we're doing a lot of things around, just like you mentioned, stability. Like we want this to be like a platform where people can go in. They start out with React Native. They can start using Expo as soon as they want to. Potentially, maybe actually I should go a little bit backwards here so listeners can have a better understanding of what I was about to say. And so with Expo, essentially you install an app on your phone and you create the app that you're building on your computer using like Create React Native App or something called like EXP, which is a CLI tool. And what you get when you create this project is just a directory with JavaScript files, and it looks pretty much like what you would get in a normal React project. So you have a file called app.js, which is just plain JavaScript. Essentially, you import some stuff, export a component, and that is the app that's rendered on the screen. So this differs from normal React Native without Expo in that when you generate a project without Expo, what you get is a similar sort of layout in terms of the JavaScript files, but you also have an iOS directory and an Android directory. And these directories include all of the native build configuration and all those sorts of things for being able to actually build the binary for your iPhone and for Android devices. And so the way that this is different is that because you just have these JavaScript files on when you use Expo, what you use to work on your app in development is this Expo client app, which you can download from the App Store and Play Store. And so when you start the packager on this project, you open the project directly on your phone without having to run Xcode or Android Studio or anything. And then it just loads the JavaScript from your machine onto the phone, and you're running your app right there. And this extends, the same sort of concept extends to when you deploy your app as well. and we take care of actually doing the build of your app for the App Store and Play Store for you. So you just run a build command. It sends off to our build servers. We take your JavaScript in. We take your assets in. Add any configuration that you add inside of Expo specific configuration file, and then spit out the binary for you that you can then take and submit to the App Store and Play Store. So yeah, we're working on a lot of things around that to make it so that you could start your project with Expo. You can use it for as long as you need to, but you eventually, without having access to the iOS and Android directories, may run into limitations depending on what you're trying to build. So we were talking about like how you can write your own custom views or plugins in Java and Objective-C and use those from your JavaScript and React Native apps. Because you're not actually building the binary to like test your app in development with Expo, right? You're using the Expo client app that you get from the App and Play Store. You don't have an option to add native code or native configuration beyond what Expo provides for you out of the box. And so you, at some point, may have to eject your project, or which is similar in concept to create React app ejecting, and you basically get all of the build configuration that you would have had otherwise. And in this case, rather than Webpack, it's the iOS and Android directories with Xcode and Android projects. And you get those, and you can sort of modify those. And so we're trying to basically make it so you can get out more easily into just the normal React Native ecosystem, because at the moment when you eject, you're still kind of tied into some Expo things, just because that ends up being what most people actually want, but not what everyone wants. And so we kind of had to make that trade-off at one point. But now we're kind of pushing forward so that you can eject and get basically full control without any ties to Expo, except for the APIs that we provide. And similarly, from the other point of view, if you're just using React Native without Expo and you want to use some of the APIs that we've built, you can you will be able to install these into any project. And so I think that'll be pretty useful for the ecosystem. Maybe some people can comment on this, but I think that there tends to be maybe it's difficult sometimes to find like well-maintained libraries that do what you need them to do. And that's one of the sort of value propositions with Expo, is we build those and we maintain them, we keep them up to date, we fix bugs with them, because we're actually a company around this, and we, it's not just someone working in their spare time or whatever. And so we're hoping that by making this available to not just people who have the luxury of working on a project whose scope fits within the context of what Expo offers, but just anybody building anything with React Native will be able to use these APIs. And I think that'll be really, really good for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one big thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Brent, that you're like I gotta say that I really like Expo. That's probably what I wanted to say. And I kind of wanted to mention Expo when we were talking about those teams and whether we need native developers. Because I feel like if you are going to use Expo or start with Expo, you are pretty much settled, right? Because you will get the package, the binaries to upload, and the APIs are great. So I feel like this is a very, very right way to start and just sort of have a very stable React Native experience overall. From the library point perspective that Brent mentioned, I can comment on that because React Native FB Ads is a sort of module that we did and contributed to Expo Core for the other developers to use. And so, I mean, it's been a while since I've done it, so I'm not really sure how you are syncing it with the latest changes, but the experience was very smooth, and I remember doing a lot of adjustments to make it work well for Expo. And actually, some of those adjustments made it like found its way back to the open source version. So I kind of like the way that Expo challenges our libraries to be even better for other developers. And many of the problems and issues that were reported because of Expo user base. So I kind of like this because everyone is benefiting, but the libraries are there for you, ready to go, and you don't have to do any linking. You don't have to think about what's that native code about, how to install it. It's waiting for you, it's ready for you, and actually some of the APIs are, I feel like, exclusive to Expo. Especially I remember one of your developers talking in SF back in the day about some OpenGL stuff and graphics in general. I don't remember this being sort of available for all React Native users quite easily. I remember this being like pursued through Expo as a first sort of user base. And that was really exciting that, some of the features were made specifically for Expo use cases and for Expo developers. So I kind of like that. So yeah, just closing that Expo thought, I feel like it's a very, very handy and important part of the ecosystem because, given that shipping your app is very hard, the fact that you can do it quite easily just from your command line is pretty exciting. Like, I love this idea. So yeah, I'm kind of waiting for the plugins that you mentioned because I feel like having the ability to extend but not eject would be just awesome. Like, that would be that would satisfy all the even business use cases that people might be having and were afraid of Expo.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to hop in and say that Expo is the shit. Okay. So like when I typically sell like a React Native project or to use React Native, I'll try and sell using Expo, right? And you get this argument sometimes like, well, what if we have to write native code? So two things on that. The first is writing native code is a huge pain in the ass, and that's an endeavor that you're going to take if you absolutely need to. Not the kind of thing you really want to do just to be cute. Number two is the actual like standard library for Expo is phenomenal. Like 99.9% of apps I've ever built, I've never had to do native code unless it was something remarkably specific. And, it's not just the native stuff that's bridged, but it's, accoutrements, things like auth session, things like the stuff my Twitter son, Evan Bacon, is doing. Things like, Expo 3, it's the jam, right? And, which brings me to another point about it. It was where you're writing it all in just JavaScript, and the unique advantage there is one of our selling points is that for certain things you can hot update the app, right? The Apple update process has gotten a lot better as far as time, but it's still not necessarily instant. So right now in React Native, if you want to do that, you do it through like Code Push, App Center, or Expo actually has a delightful distribution mechanism where I did a prod app for my buddy. It's like a football like combine scoring sort of thing. Did it all in Expo, published it out. They were having a combine. They realized that that the sort didn't take capitalization into account because I'm a goddamn amateur. And they were like, what's going on? I was like, all right, hold on, guys, I got this. And I went and just fixed it real quick, a little bit of the Expo publish, and you're good to go. So, I think that, if you're going to take your first steps into React Native, Expo is the way to go. It's the jam. Thank you, Brent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we should all just take turns just gushing about how awesome Expo is and how great Expo is being for the community.
Right.
Because seriously, Expo provides this sort of layer of support that sort of shields you from needing native developers on your team, especially when you've got a very small team and you've got a very young project. And it's really exciting to hear how Expo is going to be evolving in such a way to keep people on the Expo bandwagon, so to speak, and using the sort of blessed set of Expo modules that they've just done such a great job of maintaining for the community. I'd really sort of like to see Expo's native modules that are just really excellent kind of become kind of the status quo for open source modules in the community. And some of these modules are just really fantastic. I really want to give a shout out to Christoph Magira's project, React Native Gesture Handler. He was formerly on the React Native team. And this project is going to allow us to have really smooth animations on all devices inside React Native, which has been a problem that we've had in the navigation world for a little while now. On iOS apps in particular, when you swipe back, we need to do some pretty advanced animations and make sure that happens at 60 frames per second without losing any frames, without the app feeling laggy at all. And React Native Gesture Handler is sort of paving the way for us to be able to move the this whole gesture onto the UI thread, so that even if JavaScript misses a frame or two, your app is still going to feel like totally perfectly responsive. And you'll be able to do a lot of really slick, exciting things once gesture handler is out there. And it's very exciting because in the most recent release of Expo, they just moved it out of the danger zone, which means that its API is stabilizing and it's ready to use. So we're going to be using that in the navigation library soon to make sure that all of the gestures there are really slick. But everyone should look into this for their apps, and if you're on Expo, then you can just start using this immediately. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I've been playing around with gesture handler recently because I was prototyping some React navigation parts for ReasonML, and so one thing that I decided to change compared to the JS implementation was the gestures, to sort of use the gesture handler. And I gotta say, like, again, I already said this with React Native, making concepts easy. Like, every time I was thinking of gestures with React navigation or any other navigation library, that was the only part of the code base that I was scared of even like touching. And when I installed gesture handler and I've kind of chatted with Krzysztof about the API, it felt like, like super easy piece of code. So it kind of went very smooth. So not only the performance benefits, but just generally making, the pan responder concept gone and making the gestures more declarative will sort of open up, I feel like, a whole bunch of opportunities for people to start playing around with gestures, just like they started playing with animations thanks to the animated module.
I think it's worth explaining as well. Look, going back to the question about why you might use React Native instead of Cordova, I think gestures are a great example of one reason why you might do that. And the thing is, on the web currently, it's pretty difficult. I know there's a lot of work being done, I believe, at Google around trying to improve the mobile gesture situation on the web. But currently, it's pretty difficult to do, to be able to kind of reliably implement gestures that work across browsers and kind of have the same feel and performance and I guess behaviors as the native gestures on iOS and Android. And so what I mean by this are gestures like if you have a pinch gesture, maybe like pan or like swipe and kind of throw something away kind of thing. They're, two-finger gestures. Like you can have two hands doing things at the same time. You can have gestures where you start one in one place and then interact with another thing with another hand. Or maybe you have to have some complex logic around, okay, you're scrolling inside of a list. Should you be able to swipe to the side? How do you determine whether the swipe gesture should cancel out the scroll gesture? These are the kinds of things where there's a lot of sort of nuanced behavior around this kind of stuff, and we can actually leverage a lot of the existing native implementation that exists for it. So React Native Gesture Handler uses the native gesture recognizers on iOS and then provides a nice JavaScript API for interacting with them. And this is the kind of thing where it's going to be a while before this situation gets much better on the web, I think. And I certainly hope it does very soon. But until then, if you need to build some of these complex gestures and interactions in your app, you either have to build a native app or use React Native or some other tool that has a good solution for gestures.
One of the
and there's really no workaround on the web, I should say. It's just that's the end. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. One workaround that I've seen sort of being attempted, and I'm not sure entirely how successful it is, but I think it's a very exciting premise, is that the gesture handling code that was part of a React Native originally, it was mentioned briefly earlier, called pan responder. This was implemented by Jordan, the creator of React, actually, when he was sort of prototyping React Native. And what it does is it mimics a lot of the behavior that you see on iOS, where the lifetime of a touch can actually be pretty complicated. Where at the beginning of a touch, you might be pressing a button, and the button kind of owns that touch, and there's a system that's keeping track of who owns that touch. And then if you start moving your finger on the screen, if it's in a scroll view, for example, then the scroll view basically needs to say, oh, you're not pressing the button, you're scrolling. So during the lifetime of a single touch, the kind of ownership of that touch, and even the ownership of multiple fingers on the screen, needs to sort of be kept track of by some system. So Jordan built out this pan responder for React Native. And what's pretty cool is because the web didn't have this system at all, it was entirely missing, and there was no abstraction there. When Nicholas Gallagher went to start on React Native Web, he actually realized that a lot of the logic for managing these gestures had already been implemented by Jordan as part of Pan Responder, or the quote-unquote responder event plugin is what it's called in the code. And so basically he was able to plug that into the web browser system pretty much out of the box. And from what I understand is most of the sort of touch handling logic that worked as part of React Native also works inside of web because of this, which is pretty exciting, and sort of this is, I think, a step in the right direction. And potentially we could even re-implement a lot of what React Native gesture handler does. We could re-implement that using Pan Responder and ship that on the web potentially, such that we could have one sort of gesture API that could potentially traverse mobile as well as web, which is my dream.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about was that React is not yet at the symbolic 1.0 version. And I saw a good talk by Parashuram, or Ram as he's known, from Facebook at Reactathon just a couple weeks back, talking somewhat about the road to 1.0 and some of the possible plans about splitting things out and stuff like that. Does anyone know much more about that, or have thoughts on what it's going to take to get to 1.0 and what the future of React looks like?
I hear that this effort is like kind of nicknamed the slimmening, which is the idea is that we're going to slim down React Native Core, because right now it has a lot of components. The way Facebook works internally is there's a monorepo, which basically means there's just one repository where everybody is committing all of their code to. And this is really fabulous inside the company, because that means everyone's constantly on the latest version. That means you don't have to maintain version compatibility inside your company. It's a huge time saver. But unfortunately, the React Native repository is kind of exported as a monorepo, where we are basically getting continuous code synchronization out of Facebook, where this repository isn't just one project. It's basically the culmination of several teams, the work from a lot of different teams. So I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how the future can evolve, where very big aspects of the React Native repository are being taken out. One big example is the bundler, is the packager, codenamed Metro, that was sort of removed from the repository last year, and I think that's a big step in the right direction. But I'd like to see that with other projects like Yoga, which is the layout system that is inside of React Native, but is actually used in all sorts of other projects by now. And the real big project that Ram had sort of alluded to, and it's not entirely clear how this is going to happen roadmap-wise, but the big challenge is going to be to extract iOS and Android out of React Native Core, because the React Native Core, as we know it, is basically one sort of very important glue module, which is literally React Native. And then there's a bunch of iOS code and a bunch of Android code that's all kind of mixed together. And there's even some C++ code that both the iOS and the Android code depend on. So I'm looking forward to seeing how these things can get broken out into smaller modules, but we're going to start to see that happen over the next year is kind of the roadmap that I'm getting from the Facebook people.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have insights on that? I know I have, with some of the clients that I work with now, they use various forms of custom React Native platforms, like the backends. And so this is, all this stuff that they've been talking about is welcome, very welcome to the people I work with. And so I'm pretty excited personally about that.
It's exciting. It's also very interesting to see how various other React Native platforms have sort of emerged over the years. There are a couple that have actually forked React Native and have kind of been left behind because of that, because React Native itself is moving quite fast. An example of that would be like React Native macOS or React Native Ubuntu. Those are very exciting projects to me, but it doesn't seem like they're going to continue to live because they're basically a fork of React Native. Whereas what React Native Windows has done, they've kind of used this weird approach. I don't know if I'm using the right word, but I'm going to say they've spooned React Native, where basically they will continuously copy React Native master. So they'll keep up to date with the latest developments in React Native, but they'll overwrite a few files, and they'll utilize sort of the way that the packager works in order to override just some of their files in the JavaScript universe. And that's great because that means they're sort of maintaining an implementation of React Native that's going to be ready to go once the slimming is kind of a little bit more complete. But they've kind of done it in the right way in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And Brent, is Expo going to be taking like a larger role with the slimming? Is some of that stuff going to get more absorbed into Expo, or is it going to? Do you have any insight into the slimming stuff?
I don't follow it too closely, but yeah, definitely we're going to continue to include kind of the pieces that most people need to build their apps. And, we try and kind of aim to make it possible to build 80% or more of the apps that exist out there with Expo. And so if there are APIs that we remove from React Native and there are APIs that people tend to need, then we will just port those over, include them in Expo right away. And I think this is kind of hinting at like, as the React Native core gets smaller, I think there is kind of like a space for a sort of standard library on top of it. It's possible that people might treat, if we do it right, what I was discussing earlier about making it possible to use the Expo APIs just completely without any Expo service tie-in. I'll explain what that means exactly in a second, but if we make that possible, then you would be able to just install like Expo SDK into your project and get all of those APIs that normally exist or that currently exist in React Native, plus a bunch of other things that you have to go search for elsewhere, like video API and camera and audio and push notification stuff and things like that. And so what I mean by tying to services is that so Expo provides like, I used the comparison saying it was like Rails for React Native before. So that's a good way to think about the API side of Expo. Rails gives you a lot of stuff out of the box that makes you productive at building web applications. And we kind of do the same thing that give you these APIs to make you productive at building mobile applications. However, we also have another layer, which is kind of what Ken was discussing a little bit about. We have kind of a deployment layer as well. So if you use Expo, you publish to our server. And so when you want to release a new version of your app, you publish the new JavaScript bundle, you upload all of your assets to CloudFront and that kind of thing. And so we take care of kind of brokering releases of your app. And when clients then request what is the latest version, we can respond back with, okay, well, given the binary version that you have, you can run this version. And then we serve the appropriate assets and whatnot for that. And so essentially by taking that part out and just saying, okay, you don't have to use this part if you don't want to, you don't have to use you don't have to have an Expo account or anything like that. You just basically, with separating this out, we would just have the APIs that require no backend, no anything else. That would kind of potentially act as like a standard library for React Native components. And so that's kind of where I guess I would see Expo fitting in this. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question from the chat from Peter for you, Brent, actually, asking if there's any plans for an Expo-like SDK for Flutter.
We actually investigated that, and we're continuing to investigate it. We have actually like a working prototype on Android currently where you can basically use the Expo client and run Flutter apps, and we've bridged a bunch of the APIs to Flutter, which is pretty neat. There are some architectural limitations with Flutter that make it more difficult for us. We'll probably continue investigating that, but at this point, it's one of those things that I guess I didn't mention earlier because there's a good chance it's not going to work out because it's quite a difficult project and it might just not be possible to make it good in this context. But currently, what happens is we have to basically run the Dart VM on your device and basically interpret all of Dart or all of Flutter, which is a little bit different from React Native, where you have a lot of the implementation sitting on the native side, and then on the JavaScript side, you just have like your app and React, and then like this layer for posting messages over to the native side to then update the UI and whatnot. So in Flutter, the way that we currently have it working, we essentially have the native layer of React Native and the JavaScript layer of React Native, because all of that's written in Dart in Flutter. The entire thing is kind of implemented in user space, sort of. We have to basically run that whole thing through the Dart VM on your phone. And so naturally, it's quite slow. And so what we would need to do if we wanted to make this more feasible for actually doing things in development is we'd probably have to find a way to compile a lot of the frameworky parts of Flutter ahead of time, and then just run your actual app code through the interpreter. But yeah, that's, we'll see where that goes. Yeah, I guess if we make the API further decoupled, and this was something we were actually, it's kind of a parallel effort with splitting up the SDK to be more of like a standard library type thing. If we're able to do that, part of that we've been, as I mentioned, we bridged some of the API to Flutter. It should be possible to do similar things for other tools. And so that's kind of an interesting direction potentially for the Expo SDK, is like, how can we maybe make it so that it's this layer where, sure, there's React Native that talks to these kind of API modules that abstract over these platform-specific differences, but you could potentially insert any kind of plugin layer for Flutter or Cordova or whatever that just talks to the underlying, the underlying API wrapper, really. So it's, yeah, that's kind of the direction. So I can't really make any promises about that, but see where it goes.
Cool. So we're just about out of time. Does anyone want to leave us with any extra thoughts?
Well, maybe just a quick mention regarding React Native releases. If anyone is waiting for 0.55, there's gonna be a release with stable React today. So just in case you were waiting with the upgrade, yeah, should be up later today.
Great. I do have the Ken Wheeler Kender app, which I just posted in the chat. So if anyone wants to download that and match with Ken, they can do so now.
Yeah.
Wish you could live stream this.
What's that?
Yeah, wish you could actually screen share this right now.
I know. Yeah.
The funny story is you're actually already matched with Ken.
Instant match.
Sorry.
Instant match. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, where can I find? Where can everyone find you all on Twitter? Brent, are you on Twitters?
Yeah, I am.
Right?
I'm not Brent.
Not
So,
Brent. Not no Brent.
Yeah, that's the one. Not confusing at all.
Eric, where can we find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can find me at Eric Vicente. I spend way too much time on Twitter.
And Ken Wheeler.
You can find me in the shittiest threads imaginable, but also at Ken_Wheeler.
Oh, it looks like people are saying in the chat, Ken, that the link is broken. So the fixed link that you posted, is that what I should share?
He's already matched. That's why the link is not working.
Should I share that, Ken? Ken, you're muted.
Yeah.
Trying to
I'll see
find
if I
it.
can.
Is that?
Yeah, that one. That link is working
okay.
for me.
Here we go. I'm sending another link. Let's try this one.
Mhm.
It works. It works here.
Well, that's high
Oh,
quality.
wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
The queue is.
I feel like you should
Definitely
have
up
just
there.
used different pictures of yourself, though. Like, had it synchronized with your Facebook or something, so that I could like go through your profile pictures.
What kind of software engineer do you think I am?
So Ken_Wheeler, right?
Certainly.
Yeah. And Mr. Mike.
Yep. I'm also on Twitter. You can find me by Eric. Can you please help me with my nickname? How would you say that?
Grabow.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story because I came up with this handle like many years ago when I was in a primary school. I didn't even know what English was by then, and so I'm not really sure if there is any way to spell it properly. So probably the way I'm gonna say it will say nothing to people who are watching this. So thank you, Eric, for that.
Yeah. Grabo.
I still don't know what English is.
And you can find me on Twitter at _J Phelps. And if you want to hear more about these type of podcasts and stuff like that, you can follow this.media. And it's the words this and dot, not this, the period. Yeah, confusing, but
Easy names.
yeah, right. Yeah, we all have very easy names. And remember, my Twitter is _J Phelps. People do follow the regular J Phelps, and it's a kid who tweets football stuff. So, and I don't watch football. So, but thank you all for joining me today. I appreciate it. Great talks. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free just to tweet all of us on Twitter, and happy to answer that. And tune in next time for the next Modern Web. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Great.
Jay.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Hey.
Bye.